I would like to introduce Dr. Gordon Neufeld and thank the Neufeld Institute in the Czech Republic as well for offering us this talk. Dr. Gordon Neufeld is a clinical developmental psychologist from Canada, and he will tell us more about attachment theory and his work using attachment theory in practice. And without further ado, I would like to present Dr. Gordon Neufeld.
Thank you, Natalie. And thank you for the invitation to share with you today and take time out of your busy schedules. Although some of you, I'm sure it was a good excuse just to get away for a little bit. So hopefully I can make it worth your while to come here. I'll keep my own presentation to an hour so that we can have some time for questions. I come to you as a theorist and a therapist for over 50 years, working with various clinical populations. But after starting in working with adults primarily, I was a sessional instructor at the University of British Columbia for many years before I retired from that. And so I taught the main courses in psychology, adjustment, abnormal psychology, and so on. But I never thought that in the process I'd be developing a model of well-being. I moved far more to dealing with children because I found that 2- and 3-year-olds were very transparent. You could tell what the dynamics were going on. You did not have the cultural overlays, and you did not have the cognitive overlays, and yet you still had the main constructs of emotional defense. You still had the main constructs of all the things that you were dealing with. And they particularly suited my thesis or the assumption as a developmentalist that the unfolding of human potential is absolutely spontaneous if conditions are conducive. And so that's the main assumption. I was not trained in a developmental approach. I was trained in more the behavioral learning approaches. It was my own children, like Maslow, who converted me. And so I share that with Maslow, and I share also with Maslow that the main question is what are the conditions that are conducive to the unfolding of potential. So that's basically my life's work. I love putting pieces together. And I apologize when I come into such an audience that I cannot point you to a body of work in a peer-reviewed literature. It's beginning to take place, little bits and pieces of my articulation of the attachment-based developmental approach. If you're interested in that, you can look to the Neufeld Institute website and go to the research kind of thing and look at that. I won't be focusing on specific research, but rather the model that has evolved for over 15 years' time. And so as far as attachment is concerned, we have come to know the term attachment theory under John Bowlby's theory and the derivatives of it, the typology secure, insecure, and avoidant. That I came to psychology not as within psychology, but from a background as in organic chemistry and in physics and math. I couldn't believe that I would ever go to the soft sciences because I held them in great disdain. I was a hard scientist, And yet I found myself moving to try to understand, make sense of kids, understand the mind. So for me, I had always been involved in attachment. You can't understand the relationship of particles without understanding attachment. Einstein was the greatest attachment theorist of all. For me, Newton was an attachment theorist. Gravity, fusion, all of these things are forces of attachment. And so I'm much more in line with the definition of attachment, that is the pursuit of preservation of proximity. It's the science of relationship. It is the preeminent dynamic. It's the first dynamic of all things living and non-living. And so it is a natural science definition, not a classic Bowlby science. So those of you, when I get to train pediatricians and psychiatrists, they say, we already know attachment theory. And they say they focus on the typology and secure attachment. That's not what I'm referring to here. I'm referring to something that is far bigger, far broader, and that is based in physics, chemistry, and biology. And so with attachment based, it is loosely, one could call it, a relational based, if one is a more intuitive term. Now, to land on feelings, such a messy construct, is very unfortunate, because it, like relationship or like love, you could never define it in terms of an operational definition. You're left with not being able to see these things. I'm used to it in physics, because in physics, we always knew that what you can't see tells a story. We could never see the things. We had to put the pieces together to create a model. In chemistry, we have to do this. But somehow in psychology, there's still this idea that we can flesh out everything and make it seeable and therefore measurable. And so what I'm going to share with you today comes from a great dissonance in me, as rooted in natural science. Physics has gone way ahead of psychology in understanding the fact that you're dealing with what you can't see, but still in psychology, we are still thinking of the empirical method as being able to define everything so that you could measure it and observe it. And so we're behind the times, and we haven't got to the place where we're bringing our theorists back into our universities. We kicked theorists out because they did not generate funding. And so it was only if you create the facts, the dots, can you generate the funding that requires a university or an institute like this to do. So we have a terrible predicament. Harvard has changed its mind, and as well as the other universities now, Ivy League universities, is they're bringing the theorists back into it. Now, in the theorists, what you do is you take all the dots and you see if you can join a picture. You take the puzzle pieces, and of course, this is what I love doing. This is what I've always done. How many of you are familiar with Gestalt therapy? Okay, some of you, you will remember then the story about the 6 blind sages who have their first encounter with an elephant. And of course, because they're blind, they can't comprehend this massive phenomenon. And so they each have a little piece of it. For some, it's like a snake, a tusk, a tail. And of course, the idea of a theorist is you put the puzzle pieces together. If you have enough of them, in anthropology, that's obvious, but in psychology, it's not so obvious. But then you have to, in a sense, bring the puzzle pieces together to see the big picture. The problem with the elephant, of course, is it stands for a phenomena that is too big to see, to comprehend all at once. And it's also the elephant in the room, the thing that is so obvious, so everywhere around, so underneath our noses that we can't see it. And so in one sense, this is this great irony. Harvard does this great research to say what is the single most important factor in well-being, and comes to the conclusion that it's love. But anybody knows that that is, Science stutters when it thinks of love. It also shudders when it thinks of love. It's a four-letter word. We can't deal with that. And so and the feelings go along with it. And so what are we going to do as we push forward? We're not going to be able to answer the big questions we have without going back to our theories. Now, I will give you one model of this from an attachment-based developmental approach. I hope that that models will begin. You can use this model. A model is always evaluated in a completely different way than a method or a practice by if there's anything incongruent or dissonant with it. If it can generate theses for research, and if it has the power to explain. And so in a developmental approach, we talk about evidence-based theory, not evidence-based practice or methods, because the method itself it has to be a model, like in physics. You have to have a model that you go from rather than a particular method. What is the picture? Well, that would be too much to share with you today, but I'll share with you, in a sense, some conclusions from it. I got the opportunity to share my answer to what are the conditions conducive to the spontaneous unfolding of potential at the European Parliament in Brussels in 2011. And then the United Nations anniversary of the family, they sponsored me to do the same thing again in Stockholm. And in 2013, that paper is published, and again, you can get access to it through the Neufeld Institute. But this particular question that I was asking was, is there a particular theme? Is there a particular factor that you can tell the story of the unfolding of human potential, of recovery, of therapy, of treatment? Can you tell the story through one particular factor? And over the years, I have become more and more convinced that you can tell that through the story of feelings. It's that feelings is an incredibly messy construct. The languages, connotations, denotations, oh my goodness, it's so messy. It led Antonio Damasio, the great Portuguese neuroscientist, to write basically 2 books about trying to define feelings. I'm going to try and define it for you in 3 or 4 minutes. So I'm going to try. What Damasio's point of view as a neuroscientist is until we can develop a language to talk about how the brain actually works, it's always going to be funneless. It's always going to be a mystery, because we've actually have to rebuild the language. Now, the problem is that scientists tend to build very esoteric languages and constantly are like the curse of Babel. They don't understand each other. My son, who is a Harvard-trained neuroscientist, you have these huge annual conventions of 35,000, all with papers and all in siloed areas so that they can be expert. They don't understand each other. So we got the final frontier in which we're trying to explore, how does the brain work? How does it work? And we're suffering that curse of Babel. We just can't speak in languages that we understand. As a Canadian, we have a tradition as a Canadian. If you're a university professor and you can't talk in a way that an electrician understands or a plumber understands, then you really don't know what you're talking about. And so we have a different tradition than here in Europe. Here in Europe, it is your language gives you your club. It gives you your particular club. You speak a certain language nobody else understands. That's the tradition. I don't know what it's like here, but that's the tradition. And so there is great difficulties. I would assume that by the looks of you, that's not true here. What do I mean by pivotal? Pivotal is a beautiful term in English meaning a crucial, essential, critical, vital core, the heart of the matter, and of course to pivot is a turning point. I'll go back to this because there are a couple of turning point feelings that we have lost, our language has lost the sense of. Now again, it's somewhat unfortunate that feelings would be the answer, if indeed it is, and I'll share with you why I think it is, because of how messy it is, and because it is, it's just something that does not lend itself to research well. But I will try to define it in a very simple way, taking the conclusions of Damasio's two books rather than going through all of that. But why is it necessary? So I have feelers here. Okay? Just pretend my art isn't so good, but think of sea anemones. Think of feelers, right? And so you're feeling. And so let's go to feel. Is you're actually feeling. These are the feelers. Well, what are we feeling? We're feeling a sensory event. It produces signals. It goes through the sensory gating system in which there's all kinds of filters going on, filters that maybe psychedelics can play with, but other things do that are figured in hypersensitivity. So the sensory gating system. And so it produces signals that then are interpreted, first of all, passing through the animating brain. It's a term that I've come to use, basically to as the antidote to John Locke, who threw the construct of emotion and instinct under the bus. But now we understand there's all kinds of inner springs. It's not just emotion, it's instinct as well. And that the animating brain has a mind of its own, just like the gut has an intelligence of its own. It has an evolved intelligence that is there. There are algorithms involved. And so it operates on the signals it receives. But these, quite separate from this, then these signals are interpreted. And then we have feelings. And they can be true or not. They are already two steps removed in time and event from that which moved us. So there's great difficulty with feelings here. Now, if we go to an external event, in the English language, to touch something, a synonym would be to feel it, right? And so it's almost instant in this way. I have my vision, I have my smell, I have all my senses to be able to convert what I touch into a feeling. Now we use it as a synonym, and therefore we collapse what is happening in this. But the signals are received. If there's a problem with signals being received, if I'm numb and can't receive the signals, then there's not the signals to be interpreted. But the feeling is quite different. You close your eyes. If you close your eyes and you start touching world, especially one that you're unfamiliar with, and you have no other way, think that you don't have the smell and the seeing. This is your touch. Now your brain has to convert it to a feeling. Except we talk about feeling this way, but that's not really what we mean when we refer to feelings, but it's the same idea. Now, when you go to the internal event, what's happening inside of us, how we are moved, emotion in Latin, motion to move, how we are moved, the inner springs, and now we know that and they all have purpose. They're all trying to take care of us. And so rather than pathologizing them, as John Locke did, as part of our animal nature, becoming truly human lies in cognition, rather than in the animal nature, we've now realized, of course, we're animals. We're mammals. We all share the same animating brain, and that animating brain is trying to take care of us. So we start from the assumption in a developmental approach that there's order in the universe rather than disorder. So rather than following the construct that there's all these things that can be wrong, and that emotion still does not have purpose, and instinct, because there were so many theories of instinct, John Locke just dismissed them all. But the fact is the largest instinct drives that we know about are the instincts to play, the instincts for togetherness, and the instincts to achieve. David Alpine, one of the great American developmentalists, basically said, well, Freud saw the basic drives as love and work. Piaget saw the basic drives is play and work, and perhaps there's three basic drives. Love, which would be the most intuitive word for attachment. Work, which would be the most intuitive word for achievement, outcome-based activity, and then of course play, which is a completely different drive. So when we bring in then the next one, first of all, feelings are two steps removed in time and experience from the sensory event. That isn't so obvious in terms of when you feel your outside world. And feedback signals must first be received by the sensory gating system and then interpreted by the cerebral cortex or the interpretive brain, which leaves ample room for error, which we'll talk about in a minute. But now we move not to the external, but the internal sensory event, which is where the problems lie. In the internal sensory event, again, how we are moved to changes in the system. Main things here are a changed state like hunger, bladder pressure, pain, evoked emotion, or activated instinct. And so these are how we are moved. Now the question is signals are sent back that have to go through the sensory gating system, the filters. They don't have priority. As most of you will know, the brain can only accept 3 to 5% of all the signals it receives because our brains are very, very old. They are not at all equipped to deal with the information we have in today's world. And they've only accepted, therefore there are priorities about what is accepted. The priorities are almost always to the external world and not the internal world, because when the brain is distressed, it has to make sense of what is happening outside of us, because there's problems to be solved, there's things to run away from, all of those kinds of things. And so what happens is the filters close to that which is inside of us. I didn't know why the kids that I worked with, whether they were preschoolers or whether they were delinquents in jail or whether they were young psychotics in their 20s. I worked with a young disturbed population. They all wet their beds. I didn't understand why. But now you understand, completely why inuresis is common, because you don't feel your bladder. You don't feel your bladder pressure. And then when I worked with kids of divorce and kids were having difficulty in school, they would wet their beds at certain times, but not at other times. Why would this be? Well, the signals were not getting across that you have bladder pressure. So first of all, a feeling is not just something about emotion. In most languages, it's a synonym, feeling and emotion. So we have to split that way apart. And now it has to do with an internal event, but we've got a problem, is that in any kind of stress, the brain prefers external feedback to internal feedback. So much of the feedback simply doesn't get into the brain to be processed. We've got another problem, is that the brain doesn't have the other senses to make sense of the feedback and turn it into feelings that you can count on. And so we've got difficulty here. Now, why is this feedback important? It turns out that the animating brain is the feedback it requires does not come from the cerebral cortex. It actually comes from the feelings that are there. It is blind. It has to feel its way through life. So you can know that something doesn't work. I was a marriage therapist when I did it. Often my wife would come in and say, my husband doesn't understand me. And I would say, yes. I share, there's no sense sharing myself with him. He's not interested and he doesn't understand me. And that is what was my fantasy, was being able to have, that we would have this shared intimacy. I said, how long has this been going on? Well, we've been married now for 12 years, ever since the beginning. And I would say, well, you're still complaining about this? Well, you would think that you would either find a way of adapting or you would leave. But it's still the major complaint. And say, so how has it changed your behavior? Well, I never share with him anything. Okay, so you know that it doesn't work, you're not understood, but your behavior is to avoid sharing then, but it appears as if you have not adapted to this one bit. It hasn't transformed you. You're up against something you cannot change, which for every married person is their partner. They cannot change. But, do you follow me? But you have not at all adapted to it. You haven't left. It hasn't transformed you. Now, what's the reason? The reason is, you see, is because her animating brain, that part of the brain that is where the inner springs come from, and that neuroscientists were calling the limbic system and decided that wasn't there, that wasn't true, and haven't figured out a name for it yet, so I'm going ahead to call it the animating brain, is that animating brain, she had not felt the futility of it, and the animating brain does not work through cognition. What you know doesn't work, or what you know works. It has to feel its way through it. And so, mainly she hadn't felt the futility of it. What would you have to do to feel the futility? Well, you have to share what it is that you wanted to share. And then you experience the feeling of the futility of your encounter. And I found the same thing was true for 1-year-olds and 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds. And parents were interfering. They were parenting their children, explaining to them, this didn't work, that didn't work, but they had no patience for them to actually feel the futility they didn't encounter. Now you can hear parents say over and over again, I told you 1,000 times not to do this. And who has the problem here? Well, obviously, the child is doing things over and over again that do not work and has not felt the futility they've encountered, but the parent is doing things over and over again and has not felt the futility they encounter. So is it knowledge that is important here? Is the power in the knowledge? Is the power in cognition? Or the power in feeling? The power is in feeling. You know this immediately when you think of grief. The power is in feeling. And so this feeling serves as feedback for the operations of the animating brain. Now that we know all emotions and instincts are nature's way of trying to take care of us, serving attachment. But what about the ample room for error? Well, I'll give you an example. I used to, we have 5 kids and 7 coming 8 grandchildren. And when my speaking career developed, and we still had kids at home, then I traveled alone. And inevitably, after 2 or 3 days, I would feel this hole in me. Something was not right. Immediately, my cerebral cortex, my interpretive brain says, I know the answer, which is, for me, it knows the answer for everything like this. It's food. You're hungry. So I would eat. But after eating, it still was there. Now, most people will say not that the whole was about being hungry. Most people will say if they don't feel the whole, if you don't feel it fully, intuitively, the problem is when I'm away from home, I don't feel much. And I'll get that into it. So it was a setup for this. In fact, if you ask me, how are you feeling right now, Gordon, I would say thankfully nothing. Because my brain thankfully inhibits my feelings because my brain is under a little bit of stress right now. So there's no room for these tender feelings. So if I have to go to the bathroom, I do not know it right now. I was feeling a bit sick this morning, but I don't know it right now, right? That's so that I can perform and I don't suffer and I can do something that's very unnecessary, very unnatural to me. It's true for all of you. Your feelings will ebb and flow, and our brain is able to. As soon as your brain is under distress a little bit, the feelings are inhibited. The signals are inhibited, so they're not interpreted. Well, that's the point. Not having feelings is supposed to improve your functioning. It's not doing that right now. Your performance, because feelings get in the way of this. Good. Somebody help me. What was my point here? Where did I go up, Joe?
We're outside home, man.
Pardon?
You were outside home?
I was outside home, yeah. So I'm not feeling fully. You see, my feelings are inhibited. So my cognitive brain doesn't have much to work with in terms of its interpretation. Now, most people in that situation, when their brain is distressed and they don't feel fully, the holes of their togetherness, which is really what the whole was about. It's a hole in my togetherness. There's an emptiness there, an aloneness, and all of this, because that's our preeminent need. So they would say, rather, I'm bored. Now, that's beautiful in the English language. I don't know how it is in Czech, but boredom, to bore, is to bore a hole. So it actually suggests that you feel a hole, but because you're not feeling it fully, it's not the feedback to the animating brain can use. You just feel that hole. It occurs to you that you need to entertain yourself. You need to stimulate yourself. You need to do something to fill that hole. A video game, maybe, turn the television on, read a book, do something like this. Except after you finish that activity, the hole still remains because it wasn't the thing that the hole was about. Now, what was the answer then to boredom? What is the answer to that? It was to feel more fully, more deeply what the whole was about. Now you go into all of those kinds of things. Well, what about boredom is escalating? There's a new science of boredom, and boredom is escalating. Well, what about if togetherness is our greatest need, then facing threats to togetherness is our greatest alarm. It is what stresses us out. And so, but the fact is, if you don't feel the threat to togetherness, if you don't experience that, and you don't feel it fully in terms of the separation alarm, all you're left with a very vague sense that something is wrong. You feel your restlessness, your agitation, and your unease, and we call it anxiety. So what do we do with anxiety? We try to get it so you feel less. So all of the medication is about reducing the unease, but what is the real answer? That you would feel more. You would feel more deeply your attachments. You would feel it related to the togetherness that is threatening, so that you would have proper feedback. You know, either fulfillment is possible and a problem needs to be solved, or it's impossible and the only thing left to do is to feel the futility of that. But your brain needs feedback. Anxiety is not feedback for the brain. The cerebral cortex makes all kinds of mistakes about what you need what is the enemy? What is the threat? Is it disorder? Is it germs? Is it the closets aren't closed? Is it the cupboards? And you know the story. You know the story about all of those kinds of things. Anyways, then to move on, this is the realm of feelings, and the answer is actually to feel more deeply, more fully, for the animating brain to not be as dysfunctional as it is. Now, why are feelings so important? Why are they workhorse of the system? Well, feelings were the last part of our evolution. If you can think, emotions extend instincts. Feelings extend emotions and other things as well to realize the potentials. The last part of the distinctiveness of human evolution. And so they become the key to making us fully human and humane. They become the key to optimizing other kinds of all of the our potentials. Providing feedback is what I mentioned, the most obvious. I use the cardinal directions here just for symbolic of that. It covers all the directions, feelings. Drives and maturation, feelings now recognized as the engine of maturation, optimized development, rendering fully human and humane. If I get a chance, I'll share some other slides in terms of that. Feelings extend the reach of attachment. Now, you know people who are very attached. They need to be with, they need to be like, they need to belong to. But you also know, and you can see attachment, and somebody doesn't feel it. They don't feel attached. Now, what feelings do, when you feel attached, you not only feel the purpose of attachment, because attachment is a delivery system of care, you feel caring. You feel it fully. A 2 or 3-year-old, oh my goodness, do they care? Oh, they care fully. They don't have to be taught to care. Nobody can be taught to care. How to care? Yes, but not to care. And so caring is part of feeling an attachment fully. They take care of their stuffies. They take care of all of this. But to feel attachment, you feel the holes in your attachment. You know that you miss mommy, you miss daddy, you miss your grandma, whatever it is. So you feel the hole. You feel lonely. You feel that belonging. But when you feel attachment, it translates it. That's where it converts into a relationship. And the beautiful thing about a relationship, it usually happens about 4 or 5 years of age, when a child will give his heart, to speak in intuitive terms, to whomever he's attached to. And oh my goodness, the feeling is palpable. The feeling of emotional intimacy that is there. Only to set the stage for then sharing your feelings and the possibility of psychological intimacy. So we have the greatest optimization of attachment that is dependent upon feelings. Feelings is where it translates into a relationship. It transcends differences. It transcends significance. And the beautiful thing about it is it transcends death. So when you lose a loved one, you can't be with them anymore. But the relationship doesn't die. And that's amazing, is that attachment can transcend death. But it can only do so if it's felt. If it's not felt, you don't get the optimization. And so attachment too requires optimization, but optimization that only feelings can provide. So all of the feelings they take something that's rudimentary and they optimize it. And this is the story of humankind, except that whatever extends the reach in evolution also becomes a trouble spot. And then I'll say, oh, so that's where we're having trouble. That's what's going on. And enables what I call the 3 R's, rest, recovery, and resilience. We all need a lot of rest. Our brains need rest. Oh my goodness. The rest is becoming the key. As adults, we think we have to work at everything, work at our mental health, work at this, work at that. When the irony always has been is that no, all recovery, all healing comes from a place of deep rest. But how do we find that rest? How do we find that rest? You can sleep but not find rest at all. So rest, recovery, and resilience, it optimizes potential for healing and recovery. So feelings are, yes, we could say, if we go with the argument, that feelings are absolutely pivotal to well-being, but they're fleeting and fragile. They're associated with pain and suffering. Now we enter into the realm of philosophy, don't we? No, we enter in the reign of all of the healing arts. Oh my goodness, if the answer is where our pain and suffering lie, it interferes with functioning and performing in stressful situations. Now, we have a whole medical profession that is dedicated to reducing human suffering and increasing human performance under stressful circumstances. And so the medical profession is not invested in feeling. So almost every pill that we've invented is one that has either directly or inadvertently inhibits feelings. It increases performance and reduces suffering. So you can see our problem in mental health. Are routinely sacrificed by the brain when togetherness is threatened. We still do not have a proper model of defense. Freud's basic observation is we are defended. We are fragile creatures. And then we threw out all of it because, we got distracted by sex and turned it into psychosexual stages. We all said, that's weird. And, started out, we got to think about something else. But hey, we forgot about the main discovery of all depth psychology. We are creatures of defense. And that isn't coming in our contemporary understanding. So they're routinely sacrificed. So I don't have my feelings right now, so when will I get my feelings back? Well, that's the story. The story is one of safety. My safety is in my relationship with my wife. And so when I'm there and I'm not working on my next presentation, that's the time when my feelings will return. I always thought there was something wrong with me when I got back home, and it was like, wow. Just all the flood of feelings returning. I thought there was something wrong. And then I realized, no, this is what needs to happen. All the kids, the teenagers, and the adults I was talking about, their feelings never came back. There was no recovery of feelings. So was this the problem? Was the problem not, there was no recovery? Then this is a different kind of problem we have. They're meant to bounce back spontaneously when safe to do so, and can be willfully resisted when a sense of agency develops. My fifth child suffered from hypersensitivity, huge birth problems, and the filters didn't work so much. In today's language, or not today's language anymore, but in yesterday's language, we would call it classic autism, more in this. But my goodness, the feelings, to feel futility at 2 years of age, literally, when something would make him sad, he would put a smile on his face like this. And there were all kinds of behavioral kinds of indications that this was not a place he was willing to go. So I had to work with finger puppets. I had to work in play to make it a friendly place for him, because I knew that his brain could not adapt. There would be no plasticity there when there was that degree of fear from that place of feeling. Are routinely and carelessly medicated to reduce suffering and increase performance. We do this, and you could argue, well, as adults, yes, we should be able to make sacrifice play. The brain does this all the time. Yes, but we're not having any conflicting feelings about this. We're all out with pharmacology about reducing suffering and increasing, performance without actually squirming. We should be squirming. And we should actually be squirming when we do this with teenagers and 8-year-olds and 9-year-olds. And now it's typically when you get an attention deficit diagnosis to start at 4 years of age. We should be absolutely squirming when we do this and saying, well, what are the implications? We tend not to notice when feelings go missing. The fact is, it's not even on our radar. It's not even on the radar. Part of the problem is we're blinded by a lack of supporting language. We're still confusing feelings with emotion. Discounted because of their supposed irrationality. I mean, that was John Locke's big thing, is he saw the animal nature as evil. And now we know the animal nature is probably the best part of us. We're mammals. We share the same animating brain as other mammals. Our brain is trying to take care of us, and it does it through this. The brain has its reasons, as Pascal said. The brain has its reasons, not on the radar of the prevailing paradigms. The doctrine of disorder paradigm, which most clinicians these days buy into. What is it? Over 290 disorders already. Nor is it on learning theory, the other prevailing paradigm. Not included in today's assessments of any kind, actually. You can't find it anywhere. The strength of defense is interpreted positively and confused with resilience. There's a huge problem with language in popular culture. We get survival, and we call resilience those who have survived. rather than those who have recovered their feelings. What is supposed to bounce back? The feelings. We have in our culture a veneration of toughness, a veneration of not being affected, a veneration of having no affect. And we have a whole popular culture among our youth wanting not to be affected, to be cool. And so we have this in our culture. We have the problem with feelings are often projected where they're lacking. One of the greatest jokes, I think, a bad joke, not a good joke, one of the greatest ironies is that we've decided, oh yes, we should be bringing in programs of emotional literacy into the schools, we should be teaching empathy, we should be doing this. And oh my goodness, I mean, even a casual look at this, where does the word empathy come from? It's a made-up word. Who made it up? The Germans. They can make up any word. And who made it up? Some German artists made it up, and it literally means to put feelings in, to put pathos, to put feelings in, from Latin, where none exist. Why? Because it would make their art more engaging. I'll say it again. To put feelings, to project feelings where none exist. That was my problem as a young therapist. I was projecting feelings into disturbed young preschoolers, into the disturbed young adults I was working with, the clinical population, and into my delinquents. I thought because the things that would have made me sad, they made them sad. That would have alarmed me, alarmed them. The fact is that when we looked into their brains in research, they had every reason to be highly alarmed, but their alarm system was completely defended against. They weren't feeling. They never said, I miss. There was no evidence that they ever felt the futility of what they encountered. When I looked closer, their feelings was missing. And my bleeding heart therapist heart, was actually blinding me from the truth of the situation. So there's a dark side to empathy. There is a dark side, is that we miss what's really going on. And their loss is typically eclipsed by more pressing concerns. Like we have put behavior at the center of things. Learning, parenting, self-regulation. Self-regulation has to do with managing our impulses so we fit in society. This doesn't have to do with feelings. Today's emotional literacy program, social emotional learning programs that are sweeping North America have nothing to do with inviting people to feel. Our first term, what we say to them is calm down. Calm down. You don't get to feelings as a therapist by asking your clients to calm down. It's not how it works. And that is when you get that in parenting, when parents are saying to their kids, cut it out, stop doing that, when they fight impulsiveness in that way, no, it leads to dreadful mistakes in that way. And so first signs tend to be interpreted positively. Now we have a problem because of this idea of suffering and performance. And so the first signs, and I've seen this happen hundreds of times, as I share responsibility as a clinical psychologist with pediatricians and psychiatrists and so on, that the early signs of a child when the feelings are not recovered, either because of medication or because of the brain's own action, defensive action, better able to function and perform under stress. Oh, the pediatrician says, great, this worked. This worked. No longer talks about what distresses or hurt feelings, not as messy anymore. Child isn't coming home from school saying, somebody hurt my feelings. They don't come home all of a sudden when it's safe, full of upset. And there's a lot of noise to mental health. It is messy. When it gets quiet, you all know, is when we get concerned. All of the atrocities, all the shootings in the States are coming from places where people said, we never saw it coming. Why didn't we see it coming? Why didn't we see it coming? No longer feels unsafe or alarmed. No longer reads rejection or feels its sting. is now playing with the bullies in terms of rejection that they shouldn't be playing with, no longer given to sadness and disappointment, no longer feels as needy, empty, lonely, or dependent. We interpret that as making progress. If we understood feelings, we'd say, where did the feelings go? We're headed for trouble. See, but you have to know about this. You have to understand that that's what makes us human and humane. No longer is visibly affected by loss and lack. No longer engages in spontaneous replay after charged emotional event. The advantage of having 7 grandchildren is that I get to do my lab all over again. My question as a developmentalist is, what are the conditions that are conducive to the spontaneous unfolding of potential? I'm convinced that 2-year-olds, when they are distressed, when they need separation, when something scares them, there is a spontaneous recovery process. And I've seen it happening over and over again, even without words. And that is replay. Spontaneous replay. I'm convinced that in 15 years as a therapist, basically that's all what I did. Is I made it okay for individuals to replay charged situations and circumstances until it was played out. And it was in the replay, feeling futilities that they've never felt, they couldn't have helped, that really was the essence of efficacy in therapy. But when the replay is not there, we had a terrible situation with our youngest child, the one with hypersensitivity. You see, was continually fascinated by things, and there was no impulse in him to follow us. Now, after having 4 kids, and they all followed, so I could go like the mother goose, and they would all come behind, right? And so we're traveling in Italy, and I'm assuming that we're in a village, and they're all following behind. This had happened before. You look behind, and the youngest one isn't there because he doesn't follow, right? There is too much going on. His brain can't filter out, so he can't get these kind of things. So he's off investigated someplace. We lost him for 2 hours in a village in Italy. I'd lost him once before in a cave. I, as his father, a clinical developmental psychologist, was punished for 8 years after him playing hide and seek every night before bed. Every night. And I had to find him. I had to find him. Replay. And I said, when is it going to stop? I was thinking, do I do implosion therapy? Do I do this? Do I do that? Do I do that? I said, no, nature's taking care of him. He's getting better. I can see it. This is huge, and it was on my watch that he suffered. The worst thing you can suffer is that kind of thing. But I saw play heal him. Replay. I just had to be willing to go along with that process. That's what I mean about spontaneous recovery. And so, if you look at this closely, we would notice that the fruit of feelings is missing. And then if we looked even more closely, we would see that feelings are missing. And could this be the common denominator to most of what troubles us? To the syndromes and the troubling syndromes? I'm becoming convinced that it is the common denominator. Did I press this? Battery go on.
Jo, vi kan. Den då är
I'm becoming convinced, in fact, more I look at all of the thousands of cases that I've had over the years, the most common algorithm when the brain is under duress or distress seems to be more emotion but less feeling. And you couldn't get that algorithm unless you redefine the feeling to be able to actually know how the brain works. And so why more emotion? Because the brain is trying to fix something. The animating brain is busy trying to solve a problem, fix something, solve a whole in togetherness. And so I'm convinced. How does the brain support the recovery of feelings? Safety. Safety is the answer. Everybody knows this now. Everybody knows this. Speaking from every single, place, it's about safety. It's about safety. But here's the thing. We still have survival theory in our minds. We think it's safety having shelter, safety from poverty. We think it's safety from danger. We think it's safety from immediate things. We're not getting it that is not how our brains are programmed. Our brains have evolved to have the wisdom that survival lies in togetherness. Nature takes care of us by driving us to be together. And so the need may be survival. That's not a human drive. We haven't found it anywhere in mammals. There is no drive for survival. If an atrocity, a shooting happens here, anything like that, the first instinct, if there's children around, you see it purely, is not to run for safety. If if your attachments are anywhere around, is not to seek shelter, is to get to the side. Where's mommy? Where's daddy? Where's my husband? Where's my wife? And we'll put ourselves through danger to get to each other's side. Now, we've replicated that with rats and mice and monkeys, and it's all true. Harvard, the monkey guy, Harlow was right. Harlow was right. Is that no? And so then safety is not to be interpreted in a survival kind of way. It's not about shelter. It's not about freedom from danger. It's not about freedom from bombs dropping. What is safety? Safety is freedom from facing threats to togetherness. That's it. So, what the Neufeld Institute was running a program for Ukrainian mothers that were fleeing across to the Polish border because we have a chapter in Poland. And so we were running this program here, and they were suffering all kinds of holes in their togetherness and all kinds of danger and so on. But where do they not face this? There are two conditions in the brain where they're not facing threats to togetherness. One is trusting dependence in the context of attachment. When a child or an adult is facing the togetherness of those that they're attached to, the brain calms down. This is safety. Feelings come back. The second most important ritual we have in all societies is actually like this, but we haven't recognized it. It is the goodbye ritual. Now, in English language, goodbye means God be with you until we meet again, which obviously you wouldn't say unless you were facing a threat to togetherness, facing separation. So what do? You take the attention, you use it to draw your attachment power, to draw it away from a threat to togetherness, to facing togetherness the next time we meet. The fact that I'm your father, we're okay, anything that has to do with facing togetherness. Why? Because it's who we are. Humans don't do separation. Our brains are focused on togetherness. And so that simple ritual, which now is only used for friendship, not for children, not for anything else, etc. The primary ritual of being able to hold us together in a world that's falling apart. We don't even know what it's about anymore. It's just a habit some people engage in and some people don't. But it demonstrates the huge importance. It's trust and dependence in the context of attachment. That's where you can be safe in the middle of the war. Do you know, you probably do, that the children in the Second World War in the UK with the bombing rates had less alarm than the average child in America today? How could this be? America is in a time of peace. You could say also planning on taking over the rest of the world. I'm speaking as a Canadian here, of course. Future 51st state. But that's an aside. Forget that. That's it. But the point is where were they? They were in the bombing shelters together with their parents and facing them. their brains. This is a place that it can function, it got respite, it got release. The other one, of course, is the brain in the play drive. Why? Well, when it's in the play drive, it gives respite to the achievement drive, outcome-based drive, and it gives respite to the attachment. It's the one place for the brain that's on holiday. It is, in fact, the play mode is called activated rest by the new play science. This is the essence of it. And all of a sudden the alarm goes down. Now you can play all of these things out, but you get your feelings back. So, are those the answers? Yes, those become the answers. Now, we already know this. 90,000 adolescents in a longitudinal study of adolescent health. What is the single most important factor in well-being? The lack of risk behavior, lack of addiction, and all of those things. A strong emotional connection with a caring adult. But it's a bottom-up relationship. It's not how much the adults care. It's not how much they're involved. It's not how well their caretaking is. It's how well the child is attached and how deeply attached. In other words, we need to have the hearts of our children to shield them and protect them and to act as a sanctuary. And that includes our adolescents. We've got the research. And that research comes over and over again, the loneliness research, the marriage research. We got all the research for this. And what about play? Well, there's a number of books on what is the essence of play. All of them focus on it's a place of activated rest. It's not achievement, it's not outcome-based, it's ultimately engaging. Your will is free, nobody can make you play. It's not for real, it's parameters of real. It's not watching a movie, reading a book, unless it's a place for your emotions. It's from inside out, not outside in. And it's always safe. Not safe from person injury. It is safe. The feelings are safe, and it acts then as a sanctuary for feeling. But don't think here of playgrounds. Don't think of toys. Don't think of games. Think of the classic playgrounds that were outlined by the ancient Greeks and that become the essence of culture. And that we're losing these things in our society, in our schools. Think of where emotions want to play. I brought in John Cleese. Do you know John Cleese? Brought in here. But dance, of course, stories, making stories, music, all of these things, these are the playgrounds for emotion. And all of these are generating their own research of evidence-based of a link to well-being. And we need to listen to that. Because this is actually where the restoration is happening. Well, my time is almost up here. Or is my time up? It is. So I will go through very quickly the rest so we have time for questions here. And so what are the two feelings that I find most critical in here? Most, and you could tell already at 2 years of age when a child comes verbal. Missing is one of the most significant emotions because if you don't feel the hole in the fabric of your togetherness, that is, you should hear, I have a 2.5-year-old granddaughter and she's full of, we take care of her 2 days a week, Odessa is her name, in honor of our Ukrainian heritage. And it is, I miss. Whenever she is there, she feels the hole in that togetherness. But to miss also means you can feel full. And to miss also enables you to feel the futility of filling that hole with anything else, or the futility of fulfillment. No, you're not going to see Nana today. No, we can't do this today, or whatever it is, and to feel the futility of all that fulfillment. And so specifically, what is it about? More specifically, the holes at one's togetherness and the futility of filling these holes with anything other than tears. Now, humans cry for all kinds of things, but it turns out that when the sympathetic nervous system, the autonomic system of work, turns quite quickly into the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the autonomic nervous system branch of rest, the eyes water. Now we learn to cover it up. But the 2 and 3 and 4-year-olds will show it quite transparently. And so, yes, we can cry for all kinds of other things, but this is the body language of the feeling of futility. Well, the point here is that this little encounter, futility needs to be felt for human transformation. Whatever we can't change should be able to change us, but we have to feel the futility of it. And where rest, renewal, recovery, and resilience come from. And these are the 3 R's of well-being, 3 R's of mental health as far as I'm concerned. These are the absolute basis of this and all related to this. Well, let me just conclude this material, but quite quickly here. The problem is in our society, we're losing these places. There's a loss of cascading care. We're no longer arranged. Attachment is meant a delivery system of care. We're meant to be arranged this way. There's an epidemic of alpha children that we confuse with independent children, strong children. They're in the giving mode, the dominant mode, but it's not a safe mode. You can never make yourself feel safe. So they're highly alarmed. High problem with eating disorders, all kinds of issues, highly frustrated. They can't make themselves safe. We see them as independent. They're not recognized at 3 and 4-year-olds for what it is. We don't even have a language for it. Attaching more to peers and to things than to caring adults. My book that is for the trade book on it, Hold On to Your Kids, is now over 20 years old and in 38 languages, about that parents need to matter more. And of course, the lack of the brain in the play mode, false play, beginning to take a place of true play, and outcome-based focus and activities in our schools. In the Greek classic system, it was a play-based system, and the Finnish system still is a play-based system. Many of our others have become outcome-based systems. And so all of those things that would be important are now outcome-based activities and a loss of culture. The point here is that in our society, we have a marked lack of safe spaces for feelings to recover. So it's a recovery of feelings that is the pinpoint, but we can't do that directly. We have to support the sanctuaries of safety. I never ask my clients how they feel. I hate it when I'm asked how I feel. Kids will make things up. However they figure out you want to say that. Feelings are really hard to come to. You need to make it safe to feel. And so you can't do that directly. You can't get more feelings by just shoving emoticons down kids' throats. And that's what's happening in all our schools with emotional literacy. They think they can do it directly. One of the reasons you can't do it directly is feelings are where suffering lies. So you've got to have something to compensate it, something about satisfied togetherness, something about it being in the play mode, being absolutely engaging. You can't do it directly. The most important things in the world can't be done directly, and mental health can't be done directly. You've got to have a model, and hence this. Maybe this, if it's not this model, you have to have a model, because you've got to go, well, where do I do my interventions? How do I do the research? Where do I do this? And so you're working at this in terms of this. So the bottom line, and I'll close it here, is that the womb of well-being, as far as I'm concerned, and putting the pieces together from an attachment-based developmental approach, this ongoing womb of well-being is created out of safe togetherness with those that are responsible for us in emotional play. And this can be in the midst of incredible uncertainty, in the middle of war, of alarm, of chaos, loss and lack, adverse of childhood experiences, all of these things. This is the womb of well-being where it can continue to be generated. It is a matter of feelings, and part of those feelings is to feel sad about the things that we cannot change. The best word in English that we have for feeling the futility, but that word has been redefined as the opposite of happiness. So it doesn't work anymore. It's also a sign of depression, so it doesn't work anymore. So we actually do not have in the English language a word for the most important feeling in human healing and transformation, to feel the futility we've encountered. We've changed the meaning of grief to be something that happens after the loss of a loved one, and not about this thing. And you can see we've lost the language. We've lost the language. We no longer, to build this model. So can I distill it to the essence? I believe we need to. I believe we need to, so we can hold on to it. Like, we need to, in some way, We need to know what our mission is. What is our mission? To recover feelings. That's what our mission is. How can we do this? Well, by a relationship. Well, if there's a grandmother who intuitively does this without ever having read any book, completely uneducated, maybe not even with a very, with a challenged IQ, they'll be better at doing this than the most credentialed individual, degreed individual. Because what? They will be providing the conditions where the brain goes, oh, there's some safety, and we can get the feelings back. So, but for those of us that are professionals, for those of us that are academics, for those of us that are researchers, then we would say, well, can we translate this in a way that we can find some empirical data that we can gather the research that is there? But as a therapist, if you were a politician, can you make policy and programs? If you're in a crisis in the middle of the war, if I had the opportunity to speak to Ukrainian teachers and opportunity to speak a number of times there to the crisis situations, and an important conference in Kyiv. I've had no opportunity to the Gaza Strip, but it would be the same message. Whether it's a program, whether it's an understanding, whether it is to policymakers, whether it is the essence of therapy, the essence of treatment, it is our mission. It's a recovery mission. And the helper can be anyone. Doesn't have to be credentialed. The helper can be anyone. The words inside our head should be, you can't say it directly, but if we are therapists in treatment, it would be something like, here, let me help you get your feelings back. We can't say that directly. Again, I learned as a therapist that would have scared the hell out of the delinquent kids I've worked with. And oh my goodness, if I said it to the schizophrenics, they would never come back again. And the disturbed young preschoolers, that was out of order. But with a disturbed young preschooler, when I had early psychosis in doing so, when I know what my means are, what my method is, when I know what my mission is, then you could work indirectly to be able to increase the probability that their brains can function properly. When the brains function properly, they, getting their feelings back, and the animating brain can quit its missions that are futile, can increase its missions that are working, and so on. And so we have to do that. So, and I found this to be true from toddlerhood to teetering old age. When my mother was in hospice at 93 years of age, and I remembered, after she was not functioning well, she thought I was there before she was, and she was hallucinating because of all of the drugs and so on. It still was how I came to her. I know how I could be of help. And the same thing for Odessa, for a 2.5-year-old, in terms of where health lies. Well, thank you for letting me share this story with you. It is good news here. For me, it's good news. This doesn't necessarily cost a thing. It's really good news. To me, these are the universals. You can take this to the bank, but you don't need a bank. They're natural, universal. They're indirect, yet intuitive. They're indirect, so you need a model. They're engaging, yet deep. They're safe, completely safe. They're non-intrusive. They don't reactivate trauma. They're totally non-intrusive. They're safe and acceptable. And given some support, you can bring these into all kinds of arenas that otherwise, there'll never be enough experts in this world to be able to reverse what's happening to us. So we have to find a way. Well, thank you again for letting me share the story with you. I hope it helps make a little bit sense of your life, your children, and if it makes sense of your life and your children and your loved ones, that's where I find that it begins to make sense of our professional occupations as researchers, as therapists, as programmers, as in that way as well. Thank you, and we can have some time for questions. Yes.
I'm not in this field at all, and so I may have missed something big time. But when you get organized on the countdown as a therapy, I was like, but this is my way to stop my brain to allow the feedback. And then you talk about the play that must be engaging. Whether a child or even another adult playing, I forgot to pee. That I need to pee. I'm completely engaged. So I bring the feedback again. So I don't understand this 2 points. I need to become familiar with the feedback.
Well, it is a developmental issue. Is that if we take the calm down, the pursuit of equanimity, impulse control, if we take it as adults in terms of and visit it upon children, their brains hear it as don't feel, don't have this. And so we say, get a hold of yourself, put in a room unless you can think, calm down, you're too upset. For them, the brains hear that is advocating the inhibition of feelings. And that is the problem, is that we're actually causing depression in young children, whereas we think we're increasing emotional literacy. Because any 2, 3, 4, and 5-year-old, when you say calm down, get a hold of yourself, for them, they don't know that there was another way. Like if they had mixed feelings, which is the issue. If you feel frustrated, yet you care about not getting into trouble or not hitting your brother or whatever it is, your impulse control isn't feeling conflicted. But if you can't feel, you'll never get to that impulse control. So then you have to take more medication or more meditation to be able to get to the same effect. But I have no argument with, as an adult, going into the situation, using your tricks to calm down so that you can fulfill your adult responsibilities. My argument is it's a developmentalist. Let's not take our adult tricks and impose them on our children when they're in a developmental process. And these are phases you'll have to feel before the feelings can mix in the prefrontal cortex, before you get impulse control. We're trying to teach it. The greatest sin always, ever since Rousseau, Jean-Jacques Rousseau in developmental psychology, is what we call premature socialization. To try to get children to fit in society, in adult society, and yet not support the natural developmental ways they would get there. So that is it. Now you bring out an exception of play that is so engaging, and they forget that they have to pee. Yes, that is true.
For children and adults.
And it's true for adults, and time stands still, and so on. And yes, that is true, but it is true for the one kind of feeling because there's so many other feelings that are there. So for it's a different reason. It's not a reason because there is greater inhibition of feelings. It's greater that they're drawn into the world that's engaging. And so there's all kinds of feelings there. And the ones that have to do with the bladder don't get priority. Yes, but thank you. Yes, that was good to pick up that dissonance. If you have grandchildren, you well know the fact. They're toilet trained, but they're in the midst of play and they forget that they have to go pee. Yeah. You say it happens to us as adults too, I suppose, because yeah. Yes. Yes.
You said, for example, with patients that have anxiety, we actually need to make them feel more and not less. But when someone is having anxiety, it's already overwhelming experience, and if we tell him you need to feel more, they will be like horrifying. Could you please tell more about the difference between feelings and emotions, and how to actually can help, for example, patients with anxiety to actually recover?
Well, that hasn't been my experience with anxiety. What is so difficult is not being able to make sense of it, not having meaning. And when you actually start using a language that is clarifying rather than mystifying, when you use a language that makes sense rather than nonsense. Like when you go from a cognitive point of view, you will accentuate the language that makes nonsense, the irrationality of an obsession, how it couldn't be real. You clarify that and all of those kinds of things, right? Because you fundamentally believe there's disorder. And so if the person could think right, they would feel right. But if you approach it this way, there is a validity. The brain is trying to alarm, but you start using clarifying language. Oh, you feel very alarmed. Now, the client won't even know that you've changed the language. They won't even know, but you've changed the language. You're very alarmed. When you change the language and you move to explore their attachments, you all of a sudden, oh, I'm really, you begin to fill in that brain with the kind of way the pieces could come together. Now, you could say, well, you're just leading them along and making suggestions. That could be true. So you really have to believe in this model if that's what you're doing to be able to do that. But the suffering becomes less when you know why it is that you suffer. The suffering becomes less when it can make sense to you and there's a way through. It's always a suffering that doesn't make sense. It's one of the, as a therapist, I always protected my most disturbed clients from feeling like something was wrong with them. Because that adds a sense of shame, a sense of disorder. And so rather than doing this, you validate. When you start from the place that emotion has purpose, you look for underneath it. And so when I was working with very aggressive youth, including individuals who had killed others, you turn the attacking language into the language of frustration, which is non-fault. In which something isn't working for you. This is very frustrating. This is upsetting when it doesn't work for you. You change the language and increase the ability to be able to put the pieces together. And also, you change it. You can't go from anxiety to feeling the futility of the fulfillment, of feeling the futility of escaping the threats. You can't go from anxiety. In fact, anxiety, like aggression, is a tearless syndrome. It doesn't mean there's not upset. It means there's no tears of futility. You hear the person say over and over again, the insecurity about this and that. But you can feel intuitively, if you're an intuitive therapist, I wish I could just hold this person until there was nothing left to do but cry. There seems to be so much sadness in here that has not realized it's all frothing up into all of these obsessions, which are easy to poke holes in it and confront the irrationality of it. But just like when you have a young child and they're up against something that they can't change, and you feel like with Odessa many times, if only I could hold her, and sometimes when I can, until the tears come, until it's safe, and she's, her mother is going on business trips now, sometimes 2 or 3 days, she's only 2.5, and oh my goodness, you can see how affected she is. And so to be able to do this missing, and then being able to hold her in that experience. And so it's a safety you provide. If you are a therapist, it's a safety you provide. It's the language you provide that brings some sense into it instead of nonsense. It's the language of more of emotions that are clearer rather than obscure. And that bring you into your heart rather than into your head. And it goes to a way through. If you come alongside, sometimes with just this simple thing, is you're so alarmed that this is so hard, there's no place of rest, there's nothing like this. You can just feel sometimes palpably, figuratively, when you put your arms around the client, there's just this once wanting to go to this place where there really is nothing left to do but cry. And to see the power of this, that's why it's amazing when you see the power of this. Working with 3-year-olds. At one point, I ended up firing all my adult clients. No, I fired myself for my adult clients because there is nothing more exciting than working with 3 or 4-year-olds and working with whoever it is that's willing to work with them. So you work with them through them, often with parents or grandparents and so on. But I'd have 3 or 4-year-olds who had already been diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder, and who were full of all kinds of things having to do in all kinds of routines. And if something broke the routine, all hell would break loose, and then you'd have frustration and so on and so on. And so then I would go into this as, when is the last time your child has had some tears of sadness around futility they've encountered? Oh, I don't know, since he's a baby, since his sister was born, this, that, the other kind of day. Well, I said, well, I don't know if it's going to be possible here. I will try to help you with this to be able to hold this child in a place where he's obviously up against futility. Something doesn't work. He needs your cooperation, not you don't need his, until the sadness comes. Can you imagine doing something? Many parents will say, I can't imagine doing it. All hell would break loose. I said, well, that tells us where the problem is, because we should be able to do this. And since it seems to be too much for you, I'm going to suggest another way right now, is that we do it through play and through stories that do sadness, or through music. I once had one autistic child who just he could be brought to the things that didn't work, a couple of them, but it was through singing the songs of his day, and that he would move this and feel the sadness. Well, I was working with 2 therapists who both had children in this. They were sisters. They were both therapists. And they could imagine actually holding this, because they did this with their clients. And so I had them imagine this. And because they were therapists, I had them chart, first of all, don't do anything. And let's get how many OCD episodes can we find, in a week? And there were many every day. And then when you are able to have this experience of being able to move from alarm to sad, with children with aggression, it's mad to sad, when you're able to hold in this place, and then look at how long they're free from any obsessive OCD symptoms. And it was amazing. Sometimes we would have 4-hour windows, sometimes 6-hour windows, sometimes even 24-hour windows. You could just see the animating brain say, oh, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Like, oh my goodness, some relief from this. But it was there. And then you see this, and you see the beauty of it when you're working with a 3 and 4-year-old is so transparent. You know immediately if you're onto something or where it is. When you're trying to deal with it at 14 years of age or 40 years of age, it's a much different story. But for me, the 3-year-old holds the keys to the universe. If you understand how it works with a 3-year-old, you've got the keys to the universe. You've got the keys, and you're never tricked into thinking that it's a cognitive issue, because of the 3-year-old, everything is irrational. There's no such thing. And so, again, you have to find your way through in this. And when you do, you find your way through for 90-year-olds, for 50-year-olds, for all of those things. That was a long answer to this. I've got a lot of long answers in me, but maybe 1 or 2 others, and then I guess it's time to break. Yes?
So you talk about peer orientation.
Yes.
But your book was published more than 20 years ago. So
Yes.
what has changed over the course of 20 years, like with the rise of digital technology and stuff like that? Is there a difference between then and now?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. We're in another generation of peer orientation, so that's become more embedded in society. But the book was published in 2004, and Facebook arrived in 2005. And so that I had to write 2 more chapters on it. And then with the mental health crisis after the pandemic, I had to write another chapter yet. So there's 2 additions to it. So yes, there is when adolescents first converted digital devices into devices of togetherness, to be able to, of connection, of attachment, it basically transformed. Social media was born, right? And social media perpetrates relationships with peers, not vertical arranged. And so it draws individuals out of the cascading care with parents and grandparents, with teachers and so on. So it's at a whole another level of crises, is that the care isn't getting through. And so in the pandemic, when the experts in the pandemic read it all wrong, because they weren't informed by the fact that that children need to revolve around the adults responsible for them, even adults, for the care to get through. They assumed that the escalating crisis in mental health, all of the plummeting indices during the pandemic of keeping children home from school, that they needed their peers. Now, we already know, I don't know if Czechia is any different than the rest of the world, but in most of the world, children don't go to school to learn, they go to school to be with their friends, which tells you the degree of peer orientation that is coming. In North America, there was a great divide, as 70% of kids had greater mental health problems that were kept home from school, and 20% flourished. So we had this great divide, and you need to explain both of those things to be able to get it. And the best way I could in analyzing that literature and putting it together in the last chapter on Hold On to Your Kids was that the 20% that flourished were children who were adult oriented. They were basically attached to the adults who cared for them. The 70%, which is a remarkable figure, of our children were going to school to be with each other, and in the deprivation of at that school became more depressed, more anxious, more alarmed, more obsessive, and more attention deficit disorder, and so on. So to me, it is evidence of the wrong turn in our society. But I was hard pressed to find an expert, a pediatrician or a psychiatrist, who did not interpret, in my opinion, the data in a wrong way. And so the data is the data, but when you interpret it through the fact that it got worse, decided that what they need for their health is each other, rather than that we need to reclaim our children, we need to reclaim our students, we need to reclaim our adolescents. Well, thank you very much for your time. All the best to you and your challenges. You are in a very important field, of course, trying to solve the riddle of optimal well-being, of recovery, of healing, of how to help people get better. So all the best to you as your careers unfold in this way. Thank you.